Marcus' chin pressed his back against the crumbling concrete wall as plasma bolts sizzled past his head, leaving glowing scorch marks on the abandoned building behind him. The acrid smell of burning metal and ozone filled his nostrils as he checked his rifle's power cell. 15% remaining. Not good. The Kytherian war machines had been hunting him for 3 days now, ever since he'd stumbled into their ambush zone on the outskirts of New Shanghai. What should have been a routine supply run had turned into a nightmare of twisted metal and alien screams. The spider-like mechs moved through the rubble with terrifying precision, their multiple sensor arrays sweeping for any sign of human life. Marcus wasn't supposed to be here. As a maintenance engineer for the orbital defense platforms, he should have been safe in space, fixing broken systems and avoiding the ground war that had consumed Earth for the past 2 years. But, when the supply convoy got hit, someone had to salvage what they could from the wreckage. Someone expendable. Someone the brass wouldn't miss if things went wrong. He peered around the corner of his makeshift shelter. 3 Kytherian hunters patrolled the street below, their articulated legs clicking against the broken asphalt. Each machine stood nearly 3 meters tall, armed with pulse cannons and neural disruptors that could fry a human brain from 50 meters away. Their black carapaces gleamed with an oily sheen, covered in sensor clusters that looked disturbingly organic. A soft whimper made Marcus freeze. The sound hadn't come from the aliens. Moving carefully, he traced the noise to a pile of debris near what used to be a shopping center. Twisted metal beams and chunks of concrete had created a small cave-like space. Inside, barely visible in the shadows, something moved. Marcus's first instinct was to assume it was a trap. The Kytherians were known for their psychological warfare, using recorded human voices to lure survivors into kill zones. But, as he watched, a small hand emerged from the rubble, followed by an arm covered in what looked like crystalline scales. Not human. Not Kytherian either. The being was small, maybe the size of a human child, but clearly not a juvenile of any species Marcus recognized. Her skin was pale blue with patches of those crystal-like formations running along her arms and neck. Her hair was white as snow, hanging in tangled strands around a face that was almost human except for the large, silver eyes that seemed to reflect light like mirrors. She was injured. Dark blue blood seeped from a gash on her forehead, and one of her arms hung at an odd angle. When she saw Marcus watching her, she didn't scream or try to run. Instead, she just stared at him with those impossibly large eyes, as if resigned to whatever fate awaited her. Marcus had seen a lot of strange things since the war started. The Kytherians weren't the only alien species humanity had encountered. There were reports of refugees from other star systems, beings whose worlds had been consumed by the same mechanical plague that now threatened Earth. But this was the first time he'd actually met one. The sound of approaching footsteps made his decision for him. The Kytherian patrol was getting closer, their sensors no doubt picking up the alien girl's biosignature. In about 30 seconds, they'd round the corner and find both of them. Marcus didn't think. He acted. He sprinted across the open space, sliding into the rubble pile just as the first hunter appeared in his peripheral vision. The girl's eyes widened in terror as this strange human suddenly invaded her hiding spot, but Marcus held up one hand in what he hoped was a universal gesture for silence. The space was cramped, barely large enough for both of them. Marcus could feel the girl's rapid breathing against his shoulder as the mechanical footsteps grew louder. Through gaps in the debris, he could see the hunter's sensor arrays sweeping back and forth like mechanical bloodhounds. One of the machines stopped directly in front of their hiding place. Marcus held his breath, trying to make himself as small as possible. The girl pressed against him, trembling like a frightened animal. Her crystal formation seemed to dim, as if she was somehow suppressing their natural luminescence. The Kytherian hunter extended a probe from its main body, a thin tentacle-like appendage tipped with various scanning devices. It pushed through the gaps in the rubble, missing Marcus's face by inches. The probe paused, its sensors flashing as it detected something. Then, the girl did something extraordinary. She reached out and touched the probe with one crystalline finger. Marcus expected alarms, weapons fire, the grinding sound of machinery tearing apart their shelter. Instead, the probe simply retracted. After a moment that felt like an eternity, the hunter moved on, its companions following without question. They waited in silence for another 20 minutes before Marcus dared to speak. "What did you do?" he whispered in English, then repeated the question in the broken Mandarin he'd picked up during his time on Earth. The girl tilted her head, studying his face. When she spoke, her voice was like wind chimes, musical and strange. The words weren't in any language he recognized, but somehow he understood the basic meaning. Confusion. Fear. Gratitude. "You're not from around here either," Marcus said, more to himself than to her. She seemed to understand his tone if not his words. Slowly, she pointed to herself and said something that sounded like Zara. Then, she pointed to him with a questioning look. "Marcus," he said, tapping his chest. "My name is Marcus." "Marcus," she repeated, the syllables strange on her tongue. As they sat in the cramped space, Marcus got his first good look at her injuries. The head wound was superficial, but her arm was definitely broken. Worse, there was a burn on her side that looked like it came from a Kytherian energy weapon. She'd been in a fight and lost. Marcus reached into his pack and pulled out his med kit. It was designed for humans, but some things were universal. He showed her the antiseptic spray and bandages, miming how he wanted to treat her wounds. Zara watched him with those silver eyes, then slowly nodded. As Marcus worked, he tried to piece together what had happened. The girl was clearly not human, but she wasn't allied with the Kytherians either. Her reaction to their hunters had been pure terror, the kind that came from being hunted. And whatever she'd done to fool their sensors suggested she had abilities beyond normal biology. "Where are you from?" he asked as he bandaged her arm. She pointed up, toward the sky. Then, she made a gesture with her hands that could have meant explosion or destruction. Her home was gone, Marcus realized. Just like Earth was slowly being consumed. When he finished treating her wounds, Zara examined his handiwork with obvious curiosity. She touched the bandages gently, then looked at Marcus with what might have been surprise. Perhaps kindness between species wasn't common in her experience. The sound of distant weapons fire reminded them both that they weren't safe yet. Marcus checked his watch. In about an hour, the sun would set, and the Kytherian patrol patterns would shift. That would be their best chance to move. He tried to explain this to Zara through gestures and simple words, but communication was frustrating. Finally, she seemed to understand his urgency. She pointed in a direction that led deeper into the ruined city. Marcus shook his head. That way led directly into the heaviest fighting. But Zara insisted, grabbing his sleeve and pulling him toward what appeared to be certain death. Then, she did something that changed everything. The crystal formations on her skin began to glow softly, and Marcus felt a strange tingling in his mind. Suddenly, images flashed before his eyes. Not his own memories, but hers. He saw her ship, sleek and graceful, fleeing from something vast and terrible. He saw Kytherian hunters destroying everything in their path, consuming worlds and turning them into more machines. He saw her people, beings of crystal and light, falling before the mechanical plague. But, most importantly, he saw what she was running toward. Hidden beneath the ruined city was a communication array, one of the few still functioning on Earth. She needed to send a message to someone, somewhere among the stars. The vision faded, leaving Marcus with a splitting headache but crystal-clear understanding. Zara wasn't just a refugee. She was a messenger, carrying information that could be vital to the survival of all organic life in the galaxy. And the Kytherians knew it. As if summoned by his realization, the sound of approaching machines echoed through the ruins. But this time, it wasn't just the hunters. The deep thrumming that shook the ground beneath them could only mean one thing. The harvester had found them. Marcus had never seen one of the massive machines in person, but every human soldier knew about them. Harvesters were the size of skyscrapers, mobile factories that consumed everything in their path and converted it into raw materials for more Kytherian machines. If one was moving into this area, it meant the aliens were planning something big. Zara's crystals flared brighter, and Marcus felt another wave of shared images. This time, he saw the harvester's true purpose. It wasn't here to convert buildings into raw materials. It was here for her. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Whatever information Zara carried, the Kytherians wanted it badly enough to deploy one of their most valuable assets. And they were willing to level half the city to get it. Marcus looked at the small alien girl who had somehow become his responsibility. Her silver eyes met his, and he saw the same determination that had driven him to volunteer for the supply mission. She wasn't giving up, no matter how hopeless things seemed. "All right," Marcus said, checking his rifle one more time. "If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right." He began laying out his remaining supplies. 2 emergency rations, a half-empty water bottle, 4 frag grenades that were probably older than he was, and his rifle with its dying power cell. Not exactly an arsenal, but it would have to do. Zara watched him prepare, then began removing things from what Marcus had assumed was clothing. The crystalline formations on her body weren't just biological features, he realized. They were storage devices, holding equipment so alien he couldn't even guess at its function. She handed him a small crystal that felt warm in his palm. When he looked at it, images flashed in his mind again. This time, he saw human soldiers using similar devices, their movements faster and more precise than should have been possible. "Enhancement tech," he breathed. "You're giving me enhancement tech?" Zara nodded, then pointed to herself and made a gesture he interpreted as "better together." Marcus attached the crystal to his rifle's targeting system, not entirely sure what would happen. The results were immediate and startling. His weapons display showed not just standard targeting information, but tactical analysis, predictive firing solutions, and energy efficiency calculations that would extend his power cell's life by at least 30%. More importantly, he could sense the Kytherian machines moving through the city. Their positions appeared in his mind like glowing dots on a map, allowing him to track their patrol patterns with inhuman precision. "This is how you fooled their sensors," he said, understanding flooding through him. "You can interface with their technology." Zara's expression was grim as she nodded. She showed him more images, explaining without words that her people had once been allies of the Kytherians. They had shared technology, worked together to explore the galaxy. Until the Kytherians decided that organic life was inefficient and began their campaign of conversion. The betrayal had been swift and brutal. Entire worlds consumed, their populations processed into biological components for hybrid machines. Zara's people had tried to fight, but their own technology had been turned against them. She was one of the last. The ground shook again as the harvester drew closer. Through the gaps in their shelter, Marcus could see its massive form silhouetted against the afternoon sky. It moved like a mechanical mountain, crushing everything in its path. But they had one advantage. Marcus was human, and humans were notorious for doing the impossible when backed into a corner. He'd heard the stories from other fronts in the war. Human soldiers taking down Kytherian hunters with nothing but improvised explosives and sheer stubbornness. Civilians turning apartment buildings into death traps for entire squadrons of mechanical invaders. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their numbers. It was their absolute refusal to give up when any sane species would surrender. Marcus looked at Zara and grinned, the expression probably looking slightly insane under the circumstances. "You know what," he said. "Let's go save the galaxy." The plan was simple, which made it either brilliant or suicidal. Probably both. Marcus would create a distraction, drawing the Kytherian forces away from the communication array while Zara slipped through their lines. She had the technological interface abilities to access the human equipment, and whatever message she needed to send was apparently more important than both their lives. What could go wrong? As they prepared to leave their shelter, Zara did something unexpected. She reached up and touched Marcus's face with her crystalline hand. For a moment, he felt a warmth that had nothing to do with her alien physiology. In that touch, he sensed gratitude, determination, and something else. A connection that transcended species barriers. They were both refugees now, both fighting for the survival of something larger than themselves. When she pulled her hand away, Marcus felt different. Stronger. As if her alien enhancement hadn't just improved his weapons, but his resolve as well. The sun was setting, painting the ruined city in shades of orange and red. In the distance, the harvester's lights began to glow as it prepared for nighttime operations. Smaller machines scuttled around its base like mechanical insects, setting up the perimeter that would make their mission nearly impossible. Nearly, but not quite. Marcus and Zara emerged from their hiding place into a world transformed by war. The city that had once housed millions was now a graveyard of twisted metal and broken dreams. But somewhere in that graveyard was hope, in the form of a communication array that might just change everything. As they moved through the shadows, Marcus found himself wondering what message Zara was so desperate to send. What could be important enough to risk everything? He was about to find out. Behind them, the harvester's sensors had detected movement in the ruins. Mechanical hunters began converging on their position, their sensors cutting through the darkness like searchlights. The real fight was about to begin. The first explosion lit up the night sky like a miniature sun. Marcus watched from his position on the roof of a collapsed department store as his improvised charges detonated in sequence across the eastern district. Each blast sent columns of fire and debris into the air, creating exactly the kind of chaos he'd hoped for. The Kytherian hunters that had been closing in on their position immediately pivoted, racing toward the disturbance with mechanical precision. "That should buy us about 20 minutes, he whispered to Zara, who crouched beside him in the shadows. She nodded, her crystal formations dimmed to almost complete darkness. In the intermittent flashes of distant weapons fire, Marcus could see the concentration on her face as she monitored the alien sensor networks through her technological interface. Her abilities still amazed him, even after witnessing them for hours. She could tap into Kytherian communications, fool their detection systems, and somehow translate their tactical data into something his human-enhanced equipment could understand. The communication array was 3 blocks away, hidden in the basement of what used to be the Shanghai Stock Exchange. According to the intelligence briefings Marcus had read, it was one of the last hardened military installations still operational in the region. If Zara was right about needing to send her message, that facility was their only hope. The problem was getting there alive. Between their position and the target, Marcus counted at least 15 hunter units, 2 heavy assault platforms, and the massive bulk of the harvester itself, which had positioned itself directly above the financial district like a mechanical storm cloud. Its searchlights swept the streets in overlapping patterns, probing for any sign of organic life. "We need a better plan," Marcus muttered, studying the tactical display that Zara's enhancement crystal had overlaid on his vision. She touched his arm and shared another series of images. This time, he saw the underground tunnel system that connected much of the old city. Most of it had been damaged in the initial assault, but some passages remained intact. They could move beneath the Kytherian perimeter, avoiding the surface patrols entirely. The catch was that the tunnels were flooded with a toxic mixture of industrial chemicals and radioactive water from the nearby fusion plant that had been damaged in the first wave of attacks. For a human, even brief exposure would be fatal. But Zara's crystalline biology might provide some protection, and Marcus had enough radiation medication in his kit to survive a short journey. It was still incredibly dangerous, but It was better than trying to fight their way through 1,500 units. Underground it is, Marcus said, shouldering his pack. They made their way down through the shattered remains of the building, moving carefully through debris that could shift and trap them at any moment. The building's lower levels had partially collapsed, creating a maze of twisted support beams and chunks of concrete that provided excellent cover but made navigation treacherous. As they descended, Marcus noticed that Zara's behavior was changing. Her movements became more fluid, more precise, as if she was growing stronger the deeper they went. The crystal formations on her skin began to pulse with a faint bioluminescence that helped them navigate the darkness. "You're not just hiding from the Kytherians," Marcus realized as they reached the basement level. "You're healing." She paused to look at him, and, in her silver eyes he saw confirmation of his suspicion. Whatever she was, her species was adapted to survive in environments that would kill most other forms of life. The radiation and chemical contamination that made the tunnels deadly to humans were actually beneficial to her biology. The entrance to the tunnel system was hidden behind a maintenance door that had been welded shut when the authorities tried to contain the contamination. Marcus used one of his remaining frag grenades to blow the seal, the explosion muffled by the thick concrete walls around them. The tunnel beyond was a nightmare of corroded metal and standing water that glowed with an unhealthy green phosphorescence. The air was thick with chemical vapors that made Marcus's eyes water even through his respirator. But, when Zara stepped into the contaminated space, her crystal formations flared brighter, as if feeding on the very toxins that would have killed him in minutes. She turned back to him and gestured for him to follow, her expression confident for the first time since they'd met. Marcus injected himself with his entire supply of radiation medication and followed her into hell. The tunnel was like traveling through the intestines of some massive, dying creature. Pipes dripped unknown substances from the ceiling, and the water that covered the floor ate through his boots within the first 100 meters. But Zara moved through it all like she was walking through a garden, her alien physiology not just surviving but thriving in the hostile environment. As they waded through the contaminated passages, Marcus found himself studying his unusual companion more carefully. The crystal formations weren't just biological features or storage devices, he realized. They were processing units, breaking down the toxic materials around them and converting them into usable energy. She was quite literally feeding on the pollution that had made this part of the city uninhabitable. "Your people," he said, his voice muffled by the respirator, "they're environmental processors, aren't they? You clean up damaged ecosystems." Zara nodded, then shared another series of images that showed her species at work on various worlds. They were gardeners on a galactic scale, arriving at planets devastated by war or natural disaster and gradually restoring them to habitability. Their crystal biology allowed them to absorb and neutralize virtually any form of contamination, while their technological abilities let them interface with and repair damaged infrastructure. It explained why the Kytherians wanted her so badly. A species that could clean up the toxic remnants of their conquests would be incredibly valuable to a civilization that strip-mined entire worlds for resources. They had traveled nearly 2 kilometers through the tunnel system when Zara suddenly stopped, her crystals flaring to full brightness. In the enhanced display on Marcus's visor, new contact signatures appeared. The Kytherians had found the tunnel entrance and were sending hunter units after them. But these weren't standard ground units. The tactical analysis showed elongated shapes moving through the water with serpentine grace. Aquatic hunters, designed specifically for pursuit in flooded environments. "How long until we reach the target?" Marcus asked. Zara consulted something that might have been a navigation device integrated into her arm and held up 3 fingers. 300 meters, maybe 3 minutes at their current pace. The hunters would catch them long before then. Marcus checked his weapon's power cell. The alien enhancement had improved its efficiency, but he was still down to 8% charge. Enough for maybe 20 shots if he was careful. Against an unknown number of aquatic hunters in an environment where his mobility was severely limited, those odds weren't encouraging. Then, Zara did something that surprised him once again. She reached into the contaminated water and began doing something with the chemical composition. Her crystals pulsed in complex patterns, and Marcus watched in amazement as the toxic mixture began to change color and consistency. Within moments, the water around them had transformed from a sickly green phosphorescence to a deep blue that reminded him of Earth's oceans before the war. But, more importantly, his radiation detector readings dropped to nearly normal levels. She had somehow neutralized the contamination in a 50-meter radius around them. The pursuing hunters apparently weren't expecting this change. Their sensors, calibrated for the toxic environment, were suddenly blind to their presence. Marcus watched on his tactical display as the contact signatures began moving in confused patterns, searching for targets that had effectively vanished. "That's incredible," Marcus breathed. "You can restructure matter at the molecular level." Zara looked pleased at his amazement, but she also looked exhausted. Whatever she'd done had cost her significant energy, and Marcus could see that the crystal formations on her skin had dimmed considerably. They pressed on through the cleaned water, moving as quickly as they could while the hunters searched for them in the sections they'd already passed. But Marcus knew their luck couldn't last forever. Eventually, the Kytherians would adapt their search parameters or send different types of units that weren't dependent on the environmental sensors. The access ladder to the stock exchange basement appeared ahead of them like a salvation. It was a simple maintenance shaft that led directly into the building's sub-basement, where the military had installed their communication equipment behind layers of hardened concrete and electromagnetic shielding. As they climbed, Marcus could hear the mechanical sounds of the hunters growing closer. They had maybe minutes before the Kytherians figured out where their targets had gone. The basement of the Shanghai Stock Exchange had been transformed into something resembling a military bunker. Thick blast doors sealed off the main communications center, while secondary barriers protected the backup systems and power generators. Emergency lighting cast everything in a red glow that reminded Marcus uncomfortably of blood. But the most important thing was that it was still operational. Banks of quantum processors hummed behind protective barriers, maintaining contact with orbital defense platforms, submarine fleets, and the scattered resistance cells that were humanity's last hope of survival. Zara moved directly to the main communication array, her crystals beginning to interface with the human technology in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Sparks of bioelectric energy arced between her fingers and the control surfaces as she established connections that bypassed every security protocol in the system. "What exactly are you trying to send?" Marcus asked as he set up a defensive position by the main entrance. Instead of answering with images, Zara spoke for the first time in words he could understand. The crystal formations on her throat pulsed as she accessed some kind of translation matrix. "Warning," she said, her voice still musical but now carrying undertones of desperate urgency. "The Kytherians, not what they seem. Not machines. Something worse." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the underground environment. "What do you mean?" Zara's hands moved across the communication controls within human speed, establishing connections to relay stations across the solar system. "They were like us once. Organic. Peaceful. Then, they found something in the deep space between galaxies. Something that changed them." On the main display screen, star charts appeared showing the Kytherian expansion across the galaxy. But these weren't conquest patterns driven by resource needs or territorial ambitions. They followed specific routes, moving from system to system in a spiral pattern that was gradually converging on something at the galactic core. "They're not trying to conquer the galaxy," Marcus realized with growing horror. "They're trying to prepare it for something else." "The harvesters collect more than resources," Zara continued, her translation becoming clearer as she interfaced deeper with the human technology. "They collect consciousness. Memories. The essence of every species they absorb." Marcus watched as she uploaded data streams to every available communication channel. Military frequencies, civilian emergency broadcasts, deep space transmitters aimed at the outer colonies. She was sending her warning to anyone who could receive it. But the most important transmission was going somewhere else entirely. Through quantum relays that reached beyond the solar system, beyond human space, to coordinates that didn't appear on any star chart Marcus had ever seen. "You're calling for help," he said. "My people," Zara confirmed. "The few who escaped. They have been watching, waiting for proof that the infestation could be stopped. Your species, you fight differently than others. You do not surrender when logic says you should. This gives hope." The sound of metal being torn apart echoed through the facility. The Kytherians had found their access point and were breaking through the barriers with typical mechanical efficiency. Marcus estimated they had maybe 5 minutes before the bunker was breached. "How long do you need?" he asked, checking his rifle one final time. "The transmission must complete," Zara said, her crystals now burning so brightly they cast shadows on the walls. "If it stops before the quantum encryption finishes, the message will not reach its destination." Marcus looked at the progress indicator on the main screen. 37% complete. At the current rate, they needed at least 10 more minutes. He had 5 minutes and 8% power in his weapon. The math was not in their favor. But math had never stopped humans before. Marcus began setting up his remaining explosives around the main entrance, creating overlapping fields of fire that would channel any attackers into predetermined kill zones. It wasn't much, but it would buy them some time. The first hunter burst through the outer barrier like it was made of paper. Marcus waited until it was fully committed to its approach vector, then triggered the first set of charges. The explosion filled the corridor with superheated metal fragments and electromagnetic interference that temporarily blinded the Kytherians' sensors. Marcus used those precious seconds to put 3 precise shots into its central processor unit, the alien-enhanced targeting system letting him place each burst exactly where it would do the most damage. The hunter went down, but Marcus could already hear more of them coming. 58%, Zara reported, never taking her attention away from the transmission. 2 more hunters appeared at the breach, these ones moving with the cautious precision that indicated they'd learned from their predecessor's fate. They advanced in coordinated bounds, covering each other while their sensors mapped every possible threat. Marcus triggered his second set of explosives, but the hunters were ready this time. Their personal shields absorbed most of the blast, and they continued their advance with barely a pause. 4 shots left in his power cell. Marcus made each one count, aiming for sensor clusters and joint mechanisms rather than trying to punch through their main armor. The hunters staggered but didn't go down, their damaged systems regenerating even as they closed the distance. 73%, Zara called out. The lead hunter raised its weapon, the distinctive whine of a charging plasma cannon filling the air. Marcus dove behind his makeshift barricade just as the bolt seared through the space where his head had been. His rifle was dead, its power cell finally exhausted. Marcus drew his sidearm, a simple projectile weapon that was laughably inadequate against Kytherian armor, but it was all he had left. Then, Zara did something that changed the entire dynamic of the fight. She turned away from the communication array and faced the attacking hunters, her crystals blazing with power she'd been drawing from the facility's generators. Energy arced between her hands as she raised them toward the Kytherian machines. What happened next defied everything Marcus thought he knew about physics. The hunters simply stopped. Not destroyed, not disabled, but frozen in place as if time itself had been suspended around them. Their weapons powered down, their movements ceased, their sensors went dark. How? Marcus whispered. They are still part machine, Zara said, her voice strained with effort. And all machines can be reasoned with. She was interfacing directly with the hunters' control systems, not just jamming their sensors but actually taking control of their core functions. It was like watching someone rewrite the laws of reality through sheer force of will. But the effort was costing her. Marcus could see that her crystal formations were beginning to crack under the strain, and dark blue blood seeped from the fractures. 89%, she gasped. More hunters were coming. Marcus could hear them tearing through the outer barriers with increased urgency, probably having received telemetry data from their disabled comrades. Soon there would be too many for even Zara's abilities to handle. How much longer? Marcus asked, reloading his sidearm with his last magazine. 2 minutes, Zara replied. Maybe less. But there are more coming than I can stop. Marcus looked at the tactical display, which was showing dozens of new contact signatures converging on their position. The Kytherians had committed everything they had in the area to stopping this transmission. Which meant it really was as important as Zara claimed. Marcus made his decision. He pulled the pins from his last 2 grenades and held them in his hands, making himself into a human tripwire. When the next wave of hunters breached the inner defenses, he'd take as many with him as possible. 96%, Zara announced. The explosions started above them as the Kytherians began blasting through the building's upper floors. They were coming from all directions now, no longer concerned with preserving the facility's infrastructure. 99%. A hunter burst through the wall to their left, its plasma cannon already charging. Marcus released his grenades and threw himself toward the machine, hoping to get close enough to do some damage before it could fire. But the shot never came. Instead, the hunter simply froze, along with every other Kytherian signature on the tactical display. For a moment, Marcus thought Zara had somehow expanded her control to include all the attacking forces. Then, he realized the truth was far more remarkable. Transmission complete, Zara said, and collapsed. Outside, every Kytherian machine in the city was withdrawing. Not destroyed, not disabled, but simply leaving. The massive harvester lifted off from the financial district and began climbing toward orbital altitude, its escort of smaller craft following in perfect formation. They were retreating. Marcus helped Zara to her feet, supporting her weight as she struggled to recover from the massive energy expenditure. Her crystals were dim and cracked, but her silver eyes held a satisfaction that suggested their mission had been successful. "What did you tell them?" Marcus asked. Zara managed a smile that was almost human in its expression of relief. That the galaxy's immune system had finally awakened, she said. And that humanity would not be facing the Kytherians alone. In orbit high above them, space began to fill with ships that hadn't been there moments before. Sleek vessels of crystal and light, emerging from some kind of stealth technology that had kept them hidden until now. Zara's people had returned. And they had brought friends. The first alien ship Marcus had ever seen up close was nothing like the angular, mechanical designs of Kytherian craft. The vessel that descended from the orbital fleet looked like it had been grown rather than built, its hull flowing in organic curves that seemed to shift and adapt as he watched. Crystal formations similar to Zara's skin covered its surface, pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that might have been communication or simply the ship's equivalent of breathing. It landed in the plaza outside the stock exchange with impossible grace, touching down so softly that it barely disturbed the rubble scattered across the ground. As Marcus and Zara emerged from the underground facility, supporting each other through the debris, a section of the ship's hull simply melted away to reveal an opening. 3 figures emerged, and Marcus got his first look at Zara's people in their full glory. They were tall, nearly 2 meters in height, with the same crystalline biology as Zara but far more developed. Their skin was a deeper blue, almost indigo, and the crystal formations covered more of their bodies, creating intricate patterns that reminded Marcus of circuit boards or neural networks. They moved with fluid precision, and their silver eyes seemed to take in everything around them with calculating intelligence. The leader approached them directly, ignoring the obvious damage to the surrounding area and focusing entirely on Zara. When they spoke, it was in the musical language Marcus had heard before, but now he could sense the underlying emotions through the enhancement crystal still active in his equipment. relief, concern, and something that might have been pride. Zara responded weakly, her exhaustion evident in every gesture. She pointed to Marcus several times during the conversation, and he caught enough of the emotional undertones to understand she was explaining how he'd helped her complete the mission. When the exchange finished, the leader turned to Marcus with an expression he couldn't quite read. They studied him for a long moment, as if trying to understand how this comparatively primitive human had managed to keep their messenger alive through a Kytherian assault. Then, they spoke in accented but clear English. "I am Keeper Thane of the Crystalline Collective," the alien said, their voice carrying the same musical quality as Zara's but with additional harmonics that suggested great age and authority. "Zara of the Lost Wanderers has told us of your assistance. We are grateful." Marcus wasn't sure how to respond to that. He'd spent the last 2 years thinking of his species as alone against impossible odds, and now he was apparently having a diplomatic conversation with representatives of an advanced alien civilization. "Marcus Chen," he managed. "Engineer, Earth Defense Force. Is she going to be okay?" Keeper Thane's expression shifted to something that might have been amusement. "Zara's condition is not life-threatening. She has simply exhausted her energy reserves interfacing with primitive technology. Your communication systems are crude but effective for their intended purpose." "Thanks, I think," Marcus said. Then, the implications of what was happening began to sink in. "You said she's a wanderer? And you're the collective? Are you different groups?" "Zara is one of our scouts who was separated from the main fleet during the evacuation of the Andrian system," Thane explained as they helped support Zara's weight. "We had assumed she was lost when the Kytherians deployed their null space disruption field. Her transmission was the first confirmation we've received that any of our forward scouts survived." They began walking toward the ship, and Marcus found himself following along, still not entirely sure what was happening but unwilling to be left behind. As they approached the vessel, he could see more of its alien design features. The hull wasn't just crystal-covered but seemed to be made of crystalline material that was constantly adjusting its structure. It was like watching a living thing reshape itself in real time. "Your species intrigues us," Thane continued as they entered the ship through the melted opening. "Most civilizations surrender when faced with Kytherian forces of the magnitude deployed against your world. Yet humans continue to resist despite suffering catastrophic losses." The ship's interior was unlike anything Marcus had ever imagined. There were no sharp corners or clearly defined rooms, just flowing spaces that seemed to shift and adapt based on their current needs. Surfaces that looked like they should be solid turned out to be permeable membranes, while areas that appeared empty suddenly generated furniture or control interfaces when approached. "We're stubborn," Marcus said, trying to take in everything around him while not looking completely overwhelmed. "It's probably our best and worst trait." Thane guided them to what might have been a medical bay, though it looked more like the inside of a geode than anything Marcus would recognize as a treatment facility. Crystalline formations extended from the walls and floor, creating a cocoon-like space where Zara could rest while her damaged crystal biology began to heal itself. "Stubbornness alone cannot explain your species' resistance patterns," Thane said as they monitored Zara's condition through some kind of bioresonance interface. "We have observed human forces engaging Kytherian units with tactics that should be impossible for a species at your technological level. Kamikaze attacks against harvester units, coordinated ambushes that somehow fool their sensor networks, defensive actions that hold positions long beyond the point where any rational commander would retreat." Marcus thought about the stories he'd heard from other fronts. Civilians turning office buildings into fortresses that could hold off entire mechanical armies for weeks. Tank crews using nuclear charges as close-range weapons when their conventional ammunition ran out. Pilots ramming their fighters into Kytherian capital ships just to buy a few more minutes for evacuation ships to escape. "We fight dirty," Marcus admitted. "And we don't give up. Ever." "This fighting dirty," Thane said, the phrase sounding strange in their musical accent. "Explain this concept." Over the next several hours, as Zara recovered and the ship remained grounded in the ruined plaza, Marcus found himself giving Keeper Thane an education in human military doctrine. He described asymmetric warfare, guerrilla tactics, the concept of acceptable losses, and humanity's tendency to turn any available resource into a weapon when survival was at stake. Thane listened with an attention that suggested they were recording everything for later analysis. Occasionally they would ask questions that revealed just how different their species' approach to conflict really was. Your forces deliberately sacrificed themselves to achieve tactical advantages? Thane asked after Marcus described a particularly devastating action by the Australian Defence Force. When necessary, Marcus confirmed. We call it giving your life for something bigger than yourself. Not everyone can do it, but enough of us can to make a difference. The Crystalline Collective has never developed such strategies, Thane admitted. Our approach to conflict emphasizes preservation of consciousness above all other considerations. We retreat rather than risk unnecessary losses. How's that working out for you against the Kytherians? Marcus asked, then immediately regretted his bluntness. But Thane didn't seem offended. Instead, they displayed something that might have been rueful acknowledgement. We have lost 17 star systems and approximately 40% of our population, they said. Your species has lost one world and continues to inflict casualties on Kytherian forces at a rate that exceeds their replacement capacity. Perhaps there is wisdom in your approach that we have failed to recognize. As if summoned by their conversation, Zara stirred in her crystalline healing cocoon. Her color had improved significantly, and the cracks in her crystal formations were already showing signs of regeneration. She spoke briefly with Thane in their musical language, then turned to Marcus with an expression of renewed determination. The transmission was successful, she said, her English much clearer now that she'd had time to interface properly with the ship's translation matrix. But there is more work to be done. Thane activated a holographic display that filled the center of the medical bay with a three-dimensional star map. Marcus could see Earth at the center, surrounded by the red indicators that marked Kytherian-controlled space. But there were other colors as well. Blue markers that represented collective forces, green indicators for species that had gone into hiding, and a scattering of yellow markers that he couldn't immediately identify. The Kytherians are not the only threat, Thane explained as the display zoomed out to show a larger section of the galaxy. They are servants of something far worse. An intelligence from the void between galaxies that seeks to convert all organic matter into extensions of its will. Marcus studied the display, noting how the Kytherian expansion patterns all seemed to be converging on specific points throughout the galaxy. They're building something. A network, Zara confirmed. When it is complete, every world they have touched will become part of a single vast mind. Every consciousness they have harvested will be processed into components of something that should never exist. The scope of what they were describing was almost impossible to comprehend. Marcus had thought the Kytherians were simply another hostile alien species, like something out of an old science fiction movie. The reality was far more terrifying. But there is hope, Thane said, manipulating the display to highlight specific star systems. The collective has been building an alliance of survivors. Species that escaped the initial conquests, resistance movements on occupied worlds, even some worlds that have managed to repel Kytherian forces entirely. Marcus noted that Earth was now highlighted in a different color. You're recruiting us. We are offering partnership, Thane corrected. Your species has demonstrated capabilities that our alliance desperately needs. But, more than that, you have shown the ability to adapt and overcome obstacles that would stop other civilizations. The display zoomed in on specific battle sites where human forces had achieved significant victories. Marcus recognized some of them from military briefings. The defense of Luna Station, where a handful of human fighters had destroyed an entire Kytherian squadron. The Sydney siege, where civilian volunteers had turned the city into a death trap that consumed 3 harvester units. The miracle of Mare Tranquillitatis, where a single human engineer had somehow turned a lunar mining facility into a weapon that cracked a Kytherian dreadnought in half. These victories were not achieved through superior technology or numerical advantage, Thane noted. They succeeded because humans consistently chose tactics that no rational opponent would expect. You mean we're unpredictable, Marcus said. You are beautifully insane, Zara interjected, her translation matrix apparently struggling with the concept. Your species routinely attempts solutions that have no reasonable probability of success, yet somehow make them work through pure determination. Marcus couldn't argue with that assessment. Human military history was full of impossible victories achieved through sheer bloody-mindedness and creative problem-solving. So what's the proposal? He asked. Thane deactivated the holographic display and turned to face him directly. The crystalline collective wishes to establish a formal alliance with humanity. We will provide technological assistance, intelligence about Kytherian operations, and support for resistance activities throughout human space. In return, we ask that your species serve as the military spearhead for a coordinated offensive against the Kytherian network. Marcus felt his stomach drop. You want us to lead the attack. We want you to teach us how to fight like humans, Zara clarified. Your tactics, your strategies, your willingness to risk everything for victory. The other Alliance species have the technology and resources to support such an offensive, but none of them have the cultural framework necessary to attempt it. You need us to be the crazy ones who charge the machine guns while everyone else provides covering fire, Marcus translated. That is a crude but essentially accurate summary, Thane agreed. Marcus thought about everything he'd seen over the past few days. Zara's desperate flight to deliver a message that could save the galaxy. The Kytherian forces that had retreated when faced with something they hadn't expected. The alien ships now filling Earth's orbital space with possibilities his species had never dared imagine. What happens if we say no? He asked. Thane's expression became grave. Then, the galaxy falls to the void intelligence, one world at a time. Eventually, the Kytherian network will be complete, and everything that lives or has ever lived will become part of something that exists only to consume and convert. Including Earth. The choice, when stated so bluntly, wasn't really a choice at all. I can't speak for my entire species, Marcus said carefully. I'm just an engineer who happened to be in the right place at the right time. But I can tell you what the answer will be. Both aliens watched him intently, waiting for humanity's response to the most important question their species had ever been asked. Marcus grinned, feeling the same reckless determination that had driven him to volunteer for the supply mission that started this whole adventure. When do we start? Outside the ship, the ruins of Shanghai were beginning to buzz with activity as human military forces made contact with the newly arrived alien fleet. Marcus could hear the distant rumble of aircraft and ground vehicles as Earth's defenders rushed to establish communication with their unexpected allies. But, inside the crystalline medical bay, 3 representatives of very different species began planning humanity's first interstellar war. The galaxy was about to learn why humans had a reputation for doing the impossible. And the Kytherians were about to discover that their carefully calculated conquest had just encountered the one variable no rational planning could account for. Human stubbornness, backed by alien technology and the combined resources of a dozen desperate civilizations. It was going to be interesting. 6 months after first contact, Marcus Chin stood on the observation deck of the CNS Defiance, watching as the largest military fleet in human history prepared for humanity's first offensive action beyond the solar system. The ship itself was a marvel of hybrid technology, its human-designed framework enhanced with crystalline collective improvements that made it faster, stronger, and more resilient than anything Earth's shipyards had produced before the Alliance. Through the reinforced viewports, Marcus could see dozens of other vessels maintaining formation around the flagship. Human carriers with their angular, practical designs flew alongside the organic curves of collective ships and the geometric precision of vessels from the hegemony of rational thought, another species that had joined the growing alliance. Each ship represented a different approach to space combat, but all of them were united by a single purpose. They were going to hit the Kytherians where it hurt. Still having trouble believing this is real? Zara asked, joining him at the observation window. Her recovery had been remarkable, and she now served as the primary liaison between human forces and the collective fleet. The crystal formations on her skin had regrown stronger than before, and she moved with a confidence that spoke of restored health and renewed purpose. Every single day, Marcus admitted. 6 months ago I was fixing broken orbital platforms and trying not to get shot. Now I'm the tactical advisor for an interstellar task force planning to assault a Kytherian stronghold. The irony wasn't lost on him. His background as a maintenance engineer had proven surprisingly valuable in understanding Kytherian technology. While military strategists focused on weapons and armor, Marcus looked at the mechanical aspects of their enemies. How did their systems interface? What were the maintenance requirements for their technology? Where were the inevitable failure points that any complex machine must have? It turned out that approaching the Kytherians as engineering problems rather than military threats had revealed several exploitable weaknesses. Admiral Harrison is requesting your presence in the briefing room, Zara said. The final mission parameters are being confirmed. Marcus nodded and followed her through the ship's corridors, still marveling at how smoothly the integrated systems worked. Human engineers had adapted collective biotechnology to work with familiar interfaces, while alien specialists had enhanced human weapons and defensive systems with capabilities that seemed almost magical. The main briefing room was a testament to interspecies cooperation. Representatives from 7 different Alliance civilizations sat around a holographic display table that showed their target in 3-dimensional detail. Admiral Sarah Harrison, who had been promoted to lead the joint fleet after her success in the defense of Luna Station, stood at the head of the table with an expression of grim determination. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored allies, she began as Marcus took his seat. In approximately 6 hours we will reach the Kepler 442 system and begin Operation Sledgehammer. For those who haven't memorized the briefings, let me recap why this particular rock is worth risking everything. The holographic display zoomed in on a barren world orbiting a red dwarf star. To human eyes, it looked like nothing more than another dead planet. But the overlay information told a different story. Kepler 442b has been transformed into a processing nexus, Admiral Harrison continued. Intelligence gathered by collective scouts indicates that the Kytherians are using this facility to convert organic matter from 17 conquered star systems into components for their expansion network. Every day this facility remains operational, thousands of sentient beings are processed into biological machinery. Marcus had seen the intelligence reports. The scale of the operation was staggering. Entire populations were being fed into massive conversion plants that broke down organic matter and rebuilt it into hybrid biomechanical components. It was genocide on an industrial scale, and it had been going on for months. More importantly, added Keeper Thane, who was attending the briefing via quantum communication link from the collective flagship, our analysis indicates that this facility is a critical node in the Kytherian network. Its destruction will disrupt their expansion into this entire galactic sector. And the bad news? Asked Colonel Martinez, the human marine commander who would be leading the ground assault. The facility is defended by approximately 200 Kytherian combat units, including 3 Harvester-class dreadnoughts, Admiral Harrison replied. Our combined fleet has numerical superiority, but the Kytherians will be fighting to defend a strategic asset. They won't retreat like they did at Earth. Marcus studied the tactical display, noting the defensive positions and sensor arrays that surrounded the target. It was going to be a brutal fight, even with their technological advantages. What about the civilian population still being held there? Asked Commander Voss, the pilot who had volunteered to lead the fighter screen. Zara activated her own display, showing the internal structure of the processing facility. Our scouts have confirmed that approximately 50,000 beings from various species are still alive within the conversion plants. They are being processed gradually, which means we have a window of opportunity to extract them if the assault succeeds. 50,000, Commander Martinez repeated grimly. We'll need every transport in the fleet to evacuate that many people. Which is why the timing has to be perfect, Admiral Harrison said. The fleet will engage the Kytherian defensive forces while strike teams neutralize the facility's weapon systems. Once the perimeter is secured, evacuation ships move in to extract the prisoners while demolition teams prepare to destroy the conversion plants. Marcus cleared his throat. There's something else we need to consider. All eyes turned to him. Even after months of working with the Alliance command structure, Marcus still felt uncomfortable being the center of attention in rooms full of admirals and alien dignitaries. The Kytherians will have contingency protocols, he continued. If they think they're going to lose the facility, they'll try to deny it to us. That could mean accelerating the conversion process or simply destroying everything to prevent intelligence from falling into our hands. You're suggesting they'll murder their prisoners rather than let us rescue them, Admiral Harrison said. I'm suggesting they'll murder their prisoners because it's the logical thing to do from their perspective, Marcus corrected. They don't see those people as individuals. They're raw materials in storage. If the storage facility is compromised, they'll process the materials immediately or dispose of them. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. A rescue mission was exponentially more difficult than a simple destruction mission, especially when the enemy would actively try to eliminate the people they were trying to save. So how do we prevent that? Asked Commander Voss. Marcus activated his own display, showing the technical specifications he'd been working on for weeks. We don't give them time to implement their contingencies. We hit them so hard and so fast that their command structure can't coordinate a response. The display showed a modified assault plan that was far more aggressive than anything the Alliance military had previously attempted. Instead of the standard approach of overwhelming firepower followed by occupation, Marcus's plan called for simultaneous strikes against every critical system in the facility. We disable their command network first, he explained. Zara has confirmed that she can interface with their communication systems long enough to inject a virus that will cause system-wide coordination failures. While they're trying to restore command authority, we hit the weapon emplacements and defensive positions with everything we have. That's assuming she can get close enough to their network, Admiral Harrison noted. The facility will be heavily shielded against exactly that kind of intrusion. Which is why I'll be going with her, Marcus said. The room erupted in protests from multiple species. Admiral Harrison looked like she wanted to throw him in the brig, while Keeper Thane's image flickered as the collective leader apparently struggled with the concept of a non-military engineer voluntarily entering combat. Absolutely not, Admiral Harrison said firmly. You're too valuable to risk on a ground operation. I'm the only human who understands Kytherian technology well enough to help Zara interface with their systems, Marcus countered. And she's the only one who can actually do the interfacing. We need both of us on the ground if this is going to work. Zara supported his argument with her own tactical analysis. Marcus is correct. The Kytherian network architecture requires both technological understanding and bioelectric interface capability. Neither of us can accomplish the mission alone. The debate continued for another hour, with representatives from each species offering their own perspectives on the tactical situation. The collective favored careful preparation and minimal risk. The hegemony of rational thought wanted to calculate probability matrices for every possible outcome. The humans wanted to charge in with maximum aggression and sort out the details later. Eventually, Admiral Harrison made the command decision that would define humanity's role in the Galactic Alliance. We're going with Chen's plan, she announced. But, with modifications. Zara and Marcus will infiltrate the facility and disable the command network. Meanwhile, the fleet will engage in a full-scale assault designed to look like our primary strategy. When their defenses are focused on the space battle, our strike teams move in to secure the evacuation zones. And, if something goes wrong, asked Commander Martinez. Then, we adapt and overcome, Admiral Harrison replied with a grin that would have looked at home on any human soldier throughout history. It's what we do. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of final preparations and equipment checks. Marcus found himself suited up in armor that was part human engineering, part collective biotechnology, and part alien materials he couldn't even pronounce. The result was a protective system that could survive in vacuum, underwater, or in the toxic atmosphere of a Kytherian facility. His weapons were similarly hybrid. The basic rifle frame was human, but it fired crystalline projectiles that could adapt their properties based on target requirements. The targeting system incorporated collective bioelectric interfaces that responded to his thoughts as quickly as his reflexes. Nervous? Zara asked as they waited in the strike craft that would carry them to the planet's surface. Marcus checked his equipment one more time and considered the question seriously. Terrified, he said finally. But also excited. 6 months ago, the best-case scenario for humanity was dying slowly while fighting a losing war against an enemy we didn't understand. Now we're part of something bigger, fighting for the survival of the entire galaxy. The Alliance species are grateful for humanity's contributions, Zara said. But I think they still don't fully understand what makes your people so effective in combat. What do you think it is? Marcus asked. Zara was quiet for a moment, her crystal formations pulsing as she considered the question. Other species fight to survive, she said finally. Humans fight to win. There's a difference that goes beyond tactics or technology. The strike craft shuddered as it launched from the Defiance, beginning its descent toward the Kytherian facility. Through the viewports, Marcus could see the space battle beginning as Alliance ships engaged the defensive platforms orbiting Kepler 442b. Explosions bloomed like deadly flowers against the star field as weapons that could level cities were unleashed in carefully coordinated salvos. The Alliance fleet was holding back, making the attack look like a conventional assault while the real mission proceeded undetected. 2 minutes to insertion, called the pilot, a hegemony officer whose species resembled metallic insects with crystalline wings. Marcus and Zara moved to the deployment bay, where a dozen other strike team members prepared for combat. They were a mixed group, representatives from 4 different species united by their willingness to risk everything for the mission. Remember, Marcus said over the comm system, we need to reach the central processing core without triggering their automated defenses. That means stealth until Zara can access their network, then, we hold position until the virus takes effect. And, if we're detected before that happens, asked one of the collective warriors, her crystal formations already shifting to combat configuration. Then, we improvise, Marcus replied, channeling every human soldier who had ever faced impossible odds. And, we don't give up, no matter what. The strike craft touched down in a supply depot on the facility's outskirts, its stealth systems keeping them hidden from the Kytherian sensors that swept the area in regular patterns. As the deployment ramp lowered, Marcus got his first look at an enemy installation from ground level. The Kytherian facility was a fusion of organic and mechanical architecture that seemed designed to induce horror in any species that encountered it. Curved towers rose from the planet's surface like the ribs of some massive creature, while processing plants belched toxic vapors into the thin atmosphere. The whole complex pulsed with a sickly bioluminescence that reminded Marcus of infected tissue. But the most disturbing aspect was the sound. Even through his armor's audio filters, he could hear the mechanical rhythms of the conversion process. Grinding, tearing, rebuilding. The systematic destruction and reconstruction of living beings on an industrial scale. 50,000 people, Marcus whispered, steeling himself for what lay ahead. 50,000 people who are counting on us, Zara corrected. Even if they don't know it. As the strike team moved into the nightmare landscape of the Kytherian facility, Marcus carried with him the hopes of an entire galactic alliance and the determination that had made humanity famous across the stars. They were going to save every single prisoner they could find. And then, they were going to burn this place to the ground. The central processing core of the Kytherian facility was a cathedral of horrors. Marcus crouched behind a biomechanical support beam, watching as conveyor systems fed a steady stream of organic matter into conversion chambers the size of apartment buildings. The prisoners weren't just being killed, they were being systematically disassembled and rebuilt into components for the expanding Kytherian network. Each conversion chamber processed dozens of beings simultaneously, their consciousness harvested and integrated into the growing artificial intelligence that controlled the machines. The network access point is there, Zara whispered, pointing to a cluster of neural interface towers that rose from the center of the facility like metallic trees. But the approach is completely exposed. Marcus studied the tactical situation through his enhanced visor. Between their position and the target were at least 50 Kytherian guardians, ranging from small maintenance units to massive enforcement constructs that could level a building with their weapon systems. Worse, the entire area was covered by overlapping sensor fields that would detect any movement larger than a small insect. Above them, the space battle continued to rage. Marcus could feel the vibrations through the facility's structure as capital ship weapons exchanged fire with orbital defense platforms. The Alliance fleet was doing their job, keeping the Kytherian forces focused on the threat from space while the real mission proceeded on the ground. But they were running out of time. Intelligence estimates suggested the prisoners could only survive the conversion process for a few more hours before the damage became irreversible. If they didn't act soon, 50,000 people would die while they watched. "We need a distraction," Marcus said, studying the Guardian patrol patterns. "Something big enough to draw their attention but not so obvious that it reveals our real objective." Zara's crystal formations pulsed as she interfaced with the facility's outer systems, gathering intelligence about their defenses. "I can hold the system for 8 more minutes," Zara said, her crystals now burning so brightly they illuminated the entire core chamber. "Get the prisoners out." Marcus looked back at her, torn between his duty to the mission and his loyalty to the being who had become his closest ally in this impossible war. "I'm not leaving you behind." "You have to," Zara replied, and, for the first time since he'd met her, she sounded completely human in her determination. 50,000 lives, Marcus. That's more important than any one person. The Alliance transport ships descended through the chaos like angels of mercy, their hybrid shields deflecting debris and weapon fire as they landed in the facility's processing sectors. Marines from a dozen different species poured out of the ships, racing against time to extract as many prisoners as possible before the self-destruct sequence completed. Marcus found himself leading one of the extraction teams, moving through corridors filled with beings from across the galaxy who had been reduced to barely living components in the Kytherian machine. Humans, crystalline collective members, species he didn't recognize, all of them bearing the marks of partial conversion but still alive, still salvageable. "Transport 7, this is Chen," he called over the comm channel as his team loaded another group of survivors onto the evacuation ships. "We've got 43 more coming out of Processing Bay 12. Mixed species, all in need of immediate medical attention." "Copy that, Chen. Medical teams are standing by." The evacuation proceeded with the kind of organized chaos that human military forces had perfected over centuries of warfare. Ships landed, loaded prisoners, and lifted off again in continuous cycles, each crew pushing their vessels and themselves beyond normal operational limits. But, as the final minutes ticked away, Marcus realized they weren't going to get everyone out. There were too many prisoners, scattered across too many locations, and not enough time to reach them all. The arithmetic was brutal and inescapable. They could save most of the 50,000, but not all of them. That's when the other Alliance species showed Marcus why humanity had earned their respect. "This is Keeper Thane aboard the collective flagship," came the voice over the emergency channel. "We are redirecting all available ships to support the evacuation. every vessel in the fleet is now committed to prisoner extraction. Hegemony command confirms, added another voice. All probability calculations indicate maximum survival rates require total resource commitment. We are complying. One by one, every species in the Alliance fleet abandoned their defensive positions and threw everything they had into the rescue operation. Warships designed for combat became passenger transports. Fighter craft carried individual survivors strapped to their hulls. Even the massive capital ships extended docking tubes and cargo bays to accommodate rescued prisoners. It was magnificent. It was insane. It was exactly the kind of impossible gesture that no rational military commander would attempt. It was also completely successful. All prisoners evacuated, Admiral Harrison announced as the final transport lifted off from the facility. 51,473 souls extracted and accounted for. Marcus felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with human nationalism and everything to do with galactic solidarity. In less than an hour, representatives from 7 different species had worked together to save beings they had never met, risking their own lives for strangers who might not even speak the same languages. But there was still one person left in the facility. Zara, what's your status? Marcus called over the comm channel. Her response was barely audible over the growing system interference as the facility's power grid began its final collapse. Self-destruct sequence is at 90% completion. I can't delay it any longer. Then, get out of there. Negative. If I disconnect from the network now, the security systems will reactivate and target the evacuation ships. I have to maintain the connection until you're all clear. Marcus looked around the transport ship at the rescued prisoners, beings from across the galaxy who owed their lives to one small alien who had refused to abandon them. The mathematics were simple and terrible. Zara could save herself, or she could save everyone else. But not both. She had already made her choice. Marcus, she said, her voice growing fainter as the facility's communication systems failed, tell them that the Alliance works because people like you make it work. Tell them that sometimes the most important victory is just refusing to give up. The Kytherian facility detonated in a pillar of fire that could be seen from orbit. The explosion consumed the processing plants, the Guardian units, the network cores, and everything else the mechanical plague had built on Kepler 442b. Including the small alien who had become humanity's first true friend among the stars. Marcus stood at the observation window of the transport ship, watching the mushroom cloud rise into the planet's thin atmosphere. Around him, rescued prisoners from a dozen different species slowly began to comprehend that they were free, that they had been saved by beings they had never met. But all Marcus could think about was the conversation he'd had with Zara just days before the mission, when she'd asked him what made humans so effective in combat. "We fight to win," he'd told her. But that wasn't the whole truth. Humans fought to win, yes, but they also fought to save people. To protect things that were worth protecting. To prove that the universe didn't have to be a dark place where the strong consumed the weak. And, apparently, that attitude was contagious. Admiral Harrison to all ships, came the voice over the fleet communication channel. Operation Sledgehammer is complete. The Kytherian processing facility has been destroyed and all prisoners have been evacuated. Casualty report, 7 confirmed Kia, including Zara of the Lost Wanderers, who gave her life to ensure mission success. There was a moment of silence across the entire fleet, representatives from 7 species honoring the sacrifice of someone most of them had never met. Then, Admiral Harrison continued, her voice carrying the kind of quiet determination that had made humans famous across the galaxy. Zara of the Lost Wanderers will be posthumously awarded the Medal of Valor for actions above and beyond the call of duty. But, more than that, she will be remembered as proof that the alliance between our species isn't just a military necessity. It's a partnership between peoples who refuse to accept that evil can triumph simply because it's stronger. Marcus thought about the virus that Zara had uploaded into the Kytherian network, the one that was even now spreading to other facilities throughout their occupied territory. The AI collective that had controlled the facility was gone, but the virus would continue its work, creating cascading failures in Kytherian systems across the galaxy. More importantly, the rescue operation had sent a message to every species in the Alliance. Humans weren't just effective military allies. They were beings who would risk everything to save strangers, who would throw away tactical advantages to protect the innocent, who would choose hope over logic when the stakes were high enough. It was the kind of reputation that opened doors and changed minds throughout the galaxy. Over the following months, the Alliance grew from 7 species to 12, then 20, then 50. Each new member brought resources, technology, and perspectives that made the coalition stronger. But they all joined for the same reason. They had heard about Operation Sledgehammer, about the fleet that had abandoned defensive positions to save prisoners they didn't know, about the humans who fought not just to win but to protect. Marcus found himself promoted to the Alliance command staff, where his engineering background and understanding of Kytherian technology made him invaluable in planning future operations. But he never forgot the lesson he'd learned in the ruins of Shanghai, when a small alien had trusted him to help her save the galaxy. The war against the Kytherians would continue for years. There would be victories and defeats, advances and retreats, moments of triumph and periods of despair. But the alliance that began with humanity's refusal to surrender would eventually encompass most of the known galaxy, united by the simple principle that some things were worth fighting for no matter what the odds. And at the center of it all was a species that had once faced extinction alone, but had chosen instead to prove that the universe was big enough for everyone who was willing to stand up for what was right. Marcus Chen, engineer turned galactic diplomat, carried that message to every corner of the Alliance. Sometimes the most important victory really was just refusing to give up. The galaxy had learned that lesson well. The END can trigger a cascade failure in the Eastern Processing Sector, she said. It will look like a mechanical malfunction, but it will require significant resources to contain. Do it, Marcus ordered. Zara pressed her palm against a nearby access port, her crystals blazing as she forced her way through the Kytherian security protocols. Within seconds, alarms began sounding throughout the facility as the Eastern Sector descended into chaos. Emergency lights flashed in patterns that hurt Marcus's eyes, while automated systems tried desperately to contain what appeared to be a catastrophic system failure. The response was immediate. Guardian units throughout the central core abandoned their positions and rushed toward the apparent crisis, leaving only a skeleton force to protect the network access point. More importantly, the sensor grid had been disrupted by the emergency protocols, creating gaps in coverage that a sufficiently careful infiltrator could exploit. Move, Marcus said, and the strike team began their final approach. They advanced through the facility's twisted architecture like ghosts, using every piece of cover and shadow to avoid the remaining sensors. Marcus found himself thinking about the thousands of training exercises he'd run in virtual environments, never imagining he'd be using those skills in a real alien facility while trying to save an entire galactic sector. The other strike team members moved with professional precision, each one adapted to their species' particular advantages. The collective warriors used their bioelectric abilities to interfere with Kytherian sensors, while the hegemony soldiers employed probability calculations to predict optimal movement patterns. Even the human marines had been enhanced with alien technology that made them faster and stronger than baseline humanity. But it was still a human operation at its core. When the Kytherian Guardian that should have been responding to the Eastern Sector malfunction instead turned back toward their position, it was human instincts that recognized the threat and human aggression that dealt with it. Sergeant Kelly, a veteran of the Luna Station defense, moved with the fluid precision of someone who had learned to kill machines with his bare hands. He slipped behind the Guardian's sensor array and used his crystalline knife to sever critical control cables, disabling the unit without triggering any alarms. That's why we're leading this alliance, Marcus muttered as they continued their advance. The network access point was protected by the most advanced security systems the Kytherians had developed. Multispectrum scanners, bioelectric field detectors, and quantum analysis computers that could identify and track individual molecules. Getting past them should have been impossible for any organic being. Which was why Zara was perfect for the job. She approached the security perimeter with the confidence of someone who had spent months studying Kytherian technology from the inside. Her crystal formations shifted to match the electromagnetic signatures of the surrounding systems, while her bioelectric field synchronized with the facility's power grid. To the Kytherian sensors, she simply didn't exist. Marcus watched in amazement as she walked through security barriers that should have triggered immediate alarms. She placed her hands on the central interface tower and began the most delicate hacking operation in galactic history. The network architecture is more complex than we anticipated, Zara reported through their secure communication channel. The artificial intelligence controlling this facility is not a simple program. It's a collective consciousness made up of millions of harvested minds. Marcus felt his stomach clench. The prisoners? Some of them are already integrated into the network, Zara confirmed. But the process is reversible if we act quickly. I'm uploading the virus now. Through his enhanced display, Marcus could see the progress indicator as Zara's virus spread through the Kytherian network. It was designed to cause systematic failures that would appear to be natural degradation, buying them time to complete the mission without triggering emergency protocols. Then, everything went wrong. The artificial intelligence noticed the intrusion. Warning, unauthorized access detected, boomed a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was composed of thousands of individual voices speaking in perfect unison, the harvested consciousness of every being the Kytherians had processed in this facility. Initiating final conversion protocols. Throughout the complex, the conversion chambers began operating at emergency speed. Instead of the gradual process that preserved consciousness for integration, they switched to rapid biomass processing that would kill every remaining prisoner within minutes. Zara. Marcus shouted. I'm trying to stop it, she replied, her crystal formations blazing with energy as she fought against the artificial intelligence's countermeasures. But the network is actively resisting the virus. It's adapting faster than I anticipated. Marcus made a decision that would have seemed insane to any rational being. He drew his rifle and began shooting at the Kytherian guardians that were converging on their position, deliberately drawing attention to himself while Zara continued her work. Marcus, what are you doing? Sergeant Kelly demanded as he took cover behind a nearby support structure. Buying time, Marcus replied, switching to his grenade launcher and putting a crystalline explosive into a group of approaching maintenance units. The AI is treating us as a security threat. But if we become a military threat, it might prioritize defeating us over processing the prisoners. It was the kind of logic that only made sense to a human mind. Most species would try to minimize their profile and avoid detection. Humans, when backed into a corner, had a tendency to make themselves the biggest threat possible. The strategy worked. The facility's artificial intelligence shifted resources away from the conversion chambers and focused them on the apparent military assault. Guardian units poured into the central core from throughout the complex, while automated weapon systems targeted anything that moved. Marcus and his team found themselves in the fight of their lives, holding a defensive position around Zara while she battled the AI in cyberspace. Crystalline bullets flew through the air as human weapons met Kytherian armor, while alien allies provided support with technologies that defied easy description. Status report. Marcus called out as he reloaded his rifle. Virus is 30% integrated, Zara replied, sweat beading on her forehead as she maintained her connection to the hostile network. But the AI is trying to purge the infected systems. I need more time. Time they didn't have. Marcus could see on his tactical display that more Guardian units were approaching from all directions. In about 5 minutes, they would be completely surrounded by enough firepower to level a city block. That's when Sergeant Kelly made his own impossible decision. "Sir," he said over the comm channel, "I'm going to give you that time." Before Marcus could stop him, the Marine sergeant broke cover and charged directly into the approaching Kytherian forces. He carried enough explosives to destroy half the facility, and Marcus realized with horror what the man intended to do. "Kelly, no." But it was too late. Sergeant Kelly activated his suicide charges in the middle of the largest concentration of Guardian units, creating an explosion that shook the entire facility. The blast took out nearly a quarter of the responding forces and created enough electromagnetic interference to disrupt the AI's coordination systems. In that moment of chaos, Zara completed her upload. "Virus integration at 90%, she reported, her voice strained but determined. "The AI is losing control of peripheral systems." Throughout the facility, Kytherian machines began shutting down as the virus spread through their network. Conversion chambers stopped their deadly work, Guardian units powered down mid-attack, and security systems failed in cascading waves of system errors. But the artificial intelligence had one final card to play. "If I cannot preserve the resources," the collective voice announced, "then no one shall have them." Self-destruct charges throughout the facility began their activation sequences. In 10 minutes, the entire complex would be vaporized along with everyone inside it. "Evacuation protocols, now," Marcus ordered, activating the emergency signal that would bring the Alliance transport ships to their location. As the strike team fought their way toward the extraction point, Zara made her own sacrifice. Instead of following them to safety, she remained connected to the network, using her bioelectric abilities to delay the self-destruct sequence and keep the transport corridors open.